Some stories don't begin with monsters. They begin with silence that refuses to end. A forest where gunshots arrive before footsteps. A town where two men step into the trees and the earth decides not to give them back. And a war zone where even death feels scheduled, observed, studied. You start to notice a pattern if you listen closely enough. Not of violence, but of something choosing where violence should happen. Something patient, something unseen, something that never leaves evidence, only absence. And once you hear all three accounts, you stop believing in coincidence altogether, because every story points to the same uncomfortable truth. We were never the only ones watching.
More than 30 decades ago, back in the cold hunting season of 1992, my friend Josh and I drove deep into Belmont County, chasing something as ordinary as wild turkey, and unknowingly stepping into something far darker. I remember it with unnatural clarity, like a memory branded into my soul by something unseen, something watching. I was 22. Josh was 23. We worked long, grinding shifts at a steel mill in Wheeling, he on the line, me hauling scrap. The pay barely kept the lights alive, but it gave us something more valuable: time. 4 days on, 4 days off. Enough time to wander into the woods, where silence can hide things older than man. That year, I promised my mother I'd bring home a turkey for Thanksgiving. Fresh, clean, earned. But instead of buying one like normal people, we chose the hunter's path. Cheap, proud, and foolish. We loaded up my old '78 F-150, a rust-eaten beast that rattled like bones in a gubr, a grave, yet refused to die. Shotguns in the back, a cooler packed with beer and cold cuts, the kind of preparation that feels harmless until you realize how unprepared you really were. We drove before dawn. The sky above us was empty, no stars, no moon, just a suffocating void, like the heavens themselves had turned their backs. By the time we reached the end of that dirt road, the first light was creeping in, pale and sickly. The forest ahead stood thick and ancient, oak trees towering like silent sentinels. Belmont County was known for its rich land, acorns fattening turkeys, giving their meat that deep, natural flavor. But that morning, something about the woods felt wrong. Too quiet. Even the wind seemed to whisper in a language I didn't understand, like faint echoes of forgotten names, or perhaps gin stirring in unseen corners. We walked about a mile in, boots crunching over dead leaves that sounded too loud in the stillness. We set up a blind using camo netting and fallen branches. It was crude, but it would do. I took out my grandfather's old box call, hand-carved, worn smooth with time. As I began to mimic the soft yelps of a hen, the sound seemed to vanish too quickly, swallowed by the forest, as if something refused to let it travel. An hour passed. Nothing came. No gobbles, no movement, only the occasional rustle of squirrels, and once a distant deer snort that sounded almost like a warning. Josh joked we'd end up shooting a possum and calling it Thanksgiving dinner. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Then, a gobble, sharp, echoing. It rolled across the ridge like a signal or a summons, and just like that, the woods came alive again. A small flock appeared through the underbrush, about 50 yards ahead, careful, unaware, moving closer. We held our breath, waited, and when the moment came, I raised my 12 gauge, steadying my hands against the cold. One shot. The forest exploded. Feathers burst into the air as the biggest tom dropped instantly, his body hitting the ground with a dull, final thud. Josh fired too, taking another bird. For a moment, everything felt normal again. We laughed, high-fived, dragged the birds back toward the truck, their weight heavy, their bodies still warm. But even then, something felt off. The forest had gone quiet again. Too quiet. As we knelt down to field dress the turkeys, hands deep in blood and feathers, the air around us seemed to thicken. The smell of iron, of moat, of death lingered longer than it should. And somewhere beyond the trees, something was watching.
We were knee-deep in feathers and blood, crouched beside the half-dressed turkeys as the morning light struggled to break through the canopy. The forest should have been alive by then, birds calling, wind moving, but instead everything felt suspended, as if time itself had paused. Josh muttered something about how gutting turkeys made him wish we'd stuck to fishing, that it was easier to clean a fish than peel the wrapper off a Slim Jim. I let out a short laugh, turning toward him to respond, but the words never left my mouth. A crack split the air. Not thunder, not wood snapping, a gunshot. The bullet tore past us with a violent hiss, slicing through the silence like something alive, something hunting. It struck somewhere behind us with a heavy chunk, embedding itself into wood or earth. I didn't turn to check. For a second, neither of us moved, not even breathing. My mind scrambled for logic. Another hunter, maybe. Careless, maybe blind. But deep down, something colder crept in, whispering that this wasn't an accident. I shouted into the trees, my voice sharp, angry. "What the hell? Watch your aim!" No answer, only the dry rustling of leaves and something else beneath it, something that sounded almost like a low whisper, slipping through the trees, like the hidden presence, like the breath of a djinn, lurking just beyond sight. Then, another shot. Closer, much closer. The dirt exploded just 3 feet from Josh's boot, spraying soil and fragments into the air. He screamed, and that broke whatever trance we were in. We ran, not thinking, not planning, just running, instinct driving us like prey under the gaze of something unseen. We dove behind the truck, pressing our bodies against the cold metal, hearts slamming against our ribs like they were trying to escape. I could feel the hoof crawling under my skin, tightening around my chest. My shotgun was still back near the log, too far, too exposed. Grabbing it would mean stepping into the open, offering myself to whoever or whatever was out there. Josh tried to figure out the shooter's position, but it didn't take long to realize one thing. The shots were coming from in front of us, somewhere past the truck, hidden in the trees, watching, waiting. We crouched low, barely daring to move. The only thing we had was the truck's side mirror, angling it just enough to scan the forest without exposing ourselves. Nothing, no movement, no muzzle flash, just trees, endless trees. Josh leaned down at one point, trying to peek beneath the truck. I snapped at him, whispering harshly, "Stop! You're gonna get your head blown off!" He froze, then slowly reached for his shotgun instead. Every second felt like a gamble with death. I expected another shot at any moment, but none came. Silence returned, heavy, oppressive. It pressed down on us like something alive, like an unseen entity tightening its grip. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, not just by a man with a rifle, but by something that understood patience. We waited. 1 minute, 2, 5, still nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. only that same unnatural stillness, like the calm before something far worse. Josh whispered, "Maybe he's gone." I didn't answer right away, because deep inside, something whispered back, "He's still there, watching, choosing." But we couldn't stay there forever, so we made a decision, a desperate one. We counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Then we moved, fast. We scrambled into the truck, throwing ourselves inside without looking back. The doors slammed half shut as I turned the key, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The engine roared to life like a scream breaking through silence, and we drove hard. The tires spun dirt and gravel as we tore down that road, leaving behind the blood, the turkeys, and whatever had been hunting us. I kept expecting it, a final shot, one that would shatter the windshield or punch through the tailgate, but it never came. Just the sound of the engine and the feeling that something had let us go.
We didn't slow down until we hit the highway. Even then, I kept my body low over the wheel, half expecting a bullet to rip through the glass at any second. But none came, just the fading echo of that cursed forest behind us, and the suffocating realization that we had been hunted. Not warned, not mistaken, hunted. It took miles, long empty miles, before our hearts stopped trying to claw their way out of our chests. Neither of us spoke much. Words felt useless, fragile, like anything we said might somehow summon it back. Instead, we drove straight to the county sheriff's office. We must have looked insane, covered in blood, turkey blood, feathers stuck to our clothes, mud caked onto our boots like we'd crawled out of a grave. One of the deputies later joked he thought we were there to confess to murder until he saw the feathers. We washed up as best we could, hands still shaking, the smell of iron clinging to our skin like a curse. Even under running water, I swore I could still feel it, the warmth of fresh blood, and something colder beneath it, something wrong. We gave our statements to a deputy, walking him through every detail, but as I spoke, it all felt distant, unreal, like I was describing someone else's nightmare. He asked about the location. That's when leaving the turkeys behind suddenly mattered, because if they found those half-dressed carcasses, they'd know exactly where it happened. The deputy nodded, scribbling notes, but his expression didn't match what we felt. To him, it was likely just another hunting season incident. Stray bullet, careless shooter, maybe some idiot playing games. But we knew better. There was intent behind those shots. Precision, patience, and silence. Too much silence. He said they'd send a patrol to check it out. That was all we could do. Leave it in their hands. Afterwards, Josh and I stopped at a gas station for coffee. The kind that tastes like burnt ash but somehow grounds you back into reality. He talked me out of going back for my shotgun. At the time, I hated leaving it behind. Now, I thank God I did, because a few days later, the deputies returned to that exact spot. They found the turkeys, still there, half-dressed, rotting, but my shotgun, gone, taken. That's when the hakika, the truth, started to sink in. Whoever had fired at us hadn't run out of ammo, hadn't panicked, hadn't fled. He waited, watched us leave, then walked up to where we'd been, stepping into the same blood, the same place, and took my gun like a trophy. That thought, it stayed with me. It still does, because it means we weren't just targets. We were part of something else, something deliberate. That Thanksgiving, my mother bought a store-bought turkey. It tasted like cardboard, dry, lifeless, nothing like what we had left behind. But that wasn't what haunted me. It was the feeling that we hadn't just lost a hunt,
We had escaped something that had chosen not to finish what it started. And for years, we didn't understand just how close we came to murder. Not until 3 years later.
3 years passed. Life moved on, or at least it pretended to. The memory of that morning never truly left me, but it dulled over time, like a wound that heals on the surface while something beneath continues to rot. Every now and then I'd think about it, about the shots, the silence, the unseen presence in the trees, but I never had an answer until the summer of 1993. That was when the name surfaced. Thomas Dillon, a man convicted of 5 murders across eastern and southern Ohio. It was all over the news. Another serial killer, another monster in human skin. But it wasn't the body count that froze my blood. It was how he killed. Distance, precision, a long rifle, like he was hunting people. I remember the moment Josh called me. His voice was different, tight, almost hollow. He didn't waste time explaining, just told me to turn on the TV. And when I did, something inside me broke. Every detail lined up. The wooded areas, the isolated victims, the tariq method, taking shots from a hidden position, never seen, never heard, until it was too late. I sat down slowly, the phone still in my hand, my legs weak like something had drained the strength from them. My chest tightened and a cold realization crept in, like a shadow crossing over my soul. "We were there," Josh whispered through the line. "We were right there." And he was right. We hadn't just been shot at by some careless hunter. We had been targeted by something far worse. A predator. A man who saw human beings the way we had seen those turkeys. Targets to be stalked, waited on, and killed when the moment was perfect. And here's what makes it worse. 4, maybe 5 days after our encounter, Thomas Dillon killed again. A young man, just a few years younger than us, in almost the exact same area. Same woods, same silence, same method. That's when the tariqa, truth, fully revealed itself, like a veil being torn away. He hadn't missed us by accident. He had chosen not to finish. Or maybe something interrupted him. Something we never saw. Something unseen in that forest. Something older than reason, watching us that morning with eyes we could not see. A shadow wrapped in fear and older than reason. We were lucky, that's what people say. But luck doesn't explain why we lived. It doesn't explain why the shots stopped. And it sure as hell doesn't explain why I still feel like we were never alone out there.
The next part of this story will fill your mind with terror. Where are you sitting? How scared are you? Don't forget to comment. New viewers, subscribe or follow now.
I grew up in a small, forgotten town in Barber County, West Virginia, back in the late 1950s and early 60s. Life there was simple, poor, and tightly bound by family, faith, and survival. People prayed hard, worked harder, and when money ran thin, they went into the woods to hunt. Hunting wasn't just a pastime, it was a rite of passage. We were taught from a young age how to track, how to shoot, and most importantly, how to respect the forest. Because out there, beyond the edges of farmland and prayer, there were places where the world felt thinner, places where something unseen could be watching. Old folks would whisper about it in hushed tones, about wandering spirits, about a curse to the earth, about shadows that didn't belong to any man.
They spoke of jinn that drifted between trees, of ancient presences that had never left. As children, we laughed those stories off. We shouldn't have, because when I was 12 years old, 2 men vanished into those woods and never came back. Their names were Mo and Larry. They were hunting partners, good men, fathers, husbands, the kind of men who knew the forest like the back of their hands. Folks used to joke and call them the Two Stooges, since there was no Curly. But after they disappeared, no one ever laughed again. It started like any other hunt. They went out near a place called Stringtown. Dense woodland, rolling hills, thick undergrowth. A place where even sunlight seemed hesitant to enter. When they didn't return that evening, people assumed something had delayed them. But when the next morning came, and still no sign, that's when the fear began to spread. Search parties formed quickly. My father joined one of them. Men from all over Barber County came together, combing through miles of forest. They searched for days, then weeks, then months. 3 separate search efforts, hundreds of men, dogs, equipment, maps, and yet nothing. No footprints, no blood, no torn fabric, not even a spent shell casing. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole, or worse, as if something had taken them. I remember sitting in church every Sunday, hearing their names spoken in prayer. People asked God to bring them back, to guide them home. But as time passed, those prayers began to change, from hope to mourning. Rumors started creeping in like shadows at dusk. Some said Mo and Larry had simply left town, run away from their lives. But that never made sense, not to anyone who knew them. These were family men. They wouldn't just vanish without a word. But others whispered darker things, things people didn't say out loud. Stories about unseen forces in the woods, about cursed places where men disappear and never return, about ancient jinn that lure travelers deeper into the forest and keep them. My father never believed those stories, but he didn't believe the simple explanations either. One night, after a town meeting turned into shouting and blame, he sat out on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, staring into the dark, like he was trying to see something hidden within it. And that's when he said something that stayed with me forever. He said, they didn't walk away. They were taken. Not by accident, not by choice. Taken. He said there was no way in hell either man would abandon their wives and children without leaving something behind, not even a note. And if they'd been killed out there would have been signs, something, anything. But there was nothing. And that was the part that frightened him most, because the woods had been searched, every inch, every trail, every hollow, and still, it was like Mo and Larry had never existed at all, like they had stepped into something and never stepped back out.
Years passed, but the shadow of Mo and Larry's disappearance never left our town. It didn't fade. It settled, like a curse sinking into the soil, into the air, into the very bones of the Anas. At first, there was hope, then doubt, then something far worse, resentment. By the time I was older, the town had changed. You could feel it in the way people looked at each other, longer stares, quieter conversations, voices dropping when certain names were mentioned. The mystery didn't just haunt us, it poisoned us. Eventually, Mo and Larry's families made a decision that felt heavier than any funeral. They declared them dead in absentia. No bodies, no graves, just an acceptance forced by time and the law. I remember the memorials. 2 Sundays, 2 families dressed in black,
2 empty spaces where coffins should have been. That was when it truly became real. Not missing anymore. Gone forever. And with that acceptance came a second wave of grief, stronger, sharper, more bitter than the first. Because hope, once kept alive for years, doesn't die quietly. It screams. People started asking questions again, louder this time. At a town meeting, someone accused the search teams of not doing enough, that maybe they missed something, maybe they didn't try hard enough. That was a mistake. The room erupted. Men who had spent weeks combing those cursed woods, men like my father, stood up in fury. Voices rose, accusations flew. Old friendships cracked like dry wood under pressure. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth didn't make sense. That night, my father sat on the porch again, but this time, the whiskey didn't calm him. It fueled him. He talked about the search, how they turned over every leaf, checked every hollow, every trail. He swore on everything sacred that there was no trace. No blood, no bones, nothing, he said, his voice low, almost trembling. Men don't just vanish like that. Then he said something else, something colder. There's only 2 explanations, he muttered. Either they walked into something, or something came for them. He didn't mean animals. He didn't mean an accident. He meant something deliberate, something with intent. Some of the older folks started speaking again of things they hadn't mentioned in years, of the woods near Stringtown being cursed, of places where the veil between worlds is thin, of jinn that wander the forests, luring men off the path with whispers only they can hear, promises that lead to nowhere. They spoke of the unseen, of things that do not leave evidence, things that do not need to. At the time, I didn't believe it, but I couldn't ignore the feeling either, because something had changed in that town, not just in the people, but in the land itself. It felt heavier, darker, like something beneath the surface had been disturbed. And whatever it was, it hadn't finished.
Years went by, and just when it seemed the town had learned to live with the silence, something stirred again. It started quietly, too quietly. The county sheriff began asking questions, strange ones. He visited Mo and Larry's widows, speaking in low tones, asking about connections no one had ever heard of before. 2 farmers, Tucker County. No one understood what he was getting at. The widows certainly didn't. They had nothing to give him, no names, no ties, no reason their husbands would have ever gone near Tucker County. When they pressed him for answers, for anything at all about the tahqiq, the investigation, he gave them nothing but vague reassurances. But behind that silence, something was happening. Across county lines, on a remote hog farm, the earth was being torn open. At first, it was just a rumor. Then someone drove out there to see it with their own eyes, and what they found sent a chill through the entire region. Deputies, dozens of them, stripped to the waist under the hot sun, digging, not casually, not carefully, but desperately. Shovels striking dirt, pickaxes breaking through hardened soil, entire sections of land ripped apart, like something buried beneath needed to be uncovered. Or perhaps something buried too deeply needed to stay hidden. They dug for days, relentlessly, the kind of digging that doesn't come from curiosity, but from certainty. Word spread fast, faster than the sheriff could contain it. By the time the news reached our town, it was like pouring oil over an open flame. People demanded answers. They needed answers, because for the first time in years, it felt like there might be something real, something tangible, something buried. But the sheriff remained silent. No statements, no updates, just digging and digging and digging. People started whispering again that maybe Mo and Larry had been taken there, that maybe their bodies were buried under that cursed farm soil, or worse, that whatever had taken them had dragged them there, into the ground itself. Old fears resurfaced, stories of Earth Mal'una, where the soil itself holds secrets not meant for the living, places where bodies disappear without a trace, not because they were hidden, but because they were claimed. The kind of places where jinn are said to dwell beneath the surface, silent, patient, ancient, watching, waiting. When the sheriff finally spoke weeks later, it felt wrong, too clean, too simple. He claimed it was an anonymous tip, that the search had turned up nothing. Nothing, after days of digging, after tearing apart acres of land. Nothing. The town didn't believe him, not for a second, because no one digs like that for nothing. No one tears open the earth unless they expect to find something inside it. And when they don't tell you what they found, that's when the fear grows, because it means one of two things. Either they truly found nothing, or they found something they didn't want anyone else to see. After that, the digging stopped. The deputies left. The earth was left scarred, broken, disturbed, like a wound that refused to heal. And just like that, the silence returned. Heavier than before, darker than before, because now it wasn't just about two missing men anymore. It was about something hidden beneath the surface, something buried, something that had almost been uncovered, but wasn't.
After the digging stopped, the truth died with it. Or at least, that's what they wanted us to believe. The earth had been torn open like a grave violated, and then sealed again without explanation. Whatever lay beneath that hog farm, whatever they thought they might find, it vanished back into silence. But silence like that is never empty. It carries weight, it lingers, it breathes. Life in our town tried to return to normal. People went back to work, back to church, back to their privitski, but something inside them had shifted. You could see it in their eyes, in the way conversations stopped when certain topics came up. Mo and Larry were no longer just missing men. They had become a shadow over the town, a warning. Parents didn't speak their names directly to children, but the message was always there. Don't go too far into those woods, especially near Stringtown, because something about that place never felt right again. Hunters, men who had spent their entire lives tracking deer and walking those hills, started avoiding certain areas. Trails that used to be familiar suddenly felt wrong. Dogs refused to go deeper. They'd stop, whine, and turn back, tails tucked, as if sensing something their owners could not. And then there were the whispers. Not rumors, not stories, but actual sounds. People claimed that on certain days when the wind moved just right, you could hear voices drifting through the trees, faint, distant, calling, not loud enough to understand, but just enough to make you stop walking, just enough to make you listen. And if you listened too long, something inside you would urge you to follow.
The elders spoke of it in hushed tones, about jinn that inhabit the forests, ancient beings tied to the land long before man ever set foot upon it. They said these entities don't hunt like animals. They don't chase. They invite. They whisper. They pull. One step, then another, until you're too far in and there's no path back. I used to think those were just stories meant to scare children, but as I grew older, I realized something far more unsettling. Stories don't appear from nothing. They come from somewhere, and sometimes they come from truth. Because here's what still doesn't make sense, what never made sense. No one ever found anything belonging to Mo and Larry. Not a boot, not a rifle, not even a single drop of blood. That doesn't happen, not in any world that follows logic. So either something impossible occurred, or something beyond our understanding took them. And whatever it was, it left no trace. The sheriff never reopened the case. No new leads, no further searches, just silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the kind that watches, the kind that waits, the kind that feels like it's hiding something just beneath the surface, something that could resurface at any moment. Even now, decades later, when I think back to that place, I don't remember the arguments or the digging or even the grief. I remember standing at the edge of those woods, looking into the darkness between the trees and feeling something look back. Not human, not animal, something older, something patient, something that does not need to leave evidence because it never intended to be found. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I swear I can still hear it, a faint, distant call, like voices echoing from somewhere deep within the forest, still waiting, still calling.
The next part of this story will fill your mind with terror. Where are you sitting? How scared are you? Don't forget to comment. New viewers, subscribe or follow now.
I joined the British Army when I was 18. Not out of honor, not out of patriotism, but because something in my life needed to change fast. I had fallen in with the wrong crowd back home. One night, drunk and reckless, we nearly killed ourselves on the road. That was the moment something inside me snapped, or perhaps woke up. My father saw it too. He told me the army would give me discipline, purpose, a way out. So I signed up. Infantry, the Cheshire Regiment. This was near the end of the Cold War, back when everything was about Russia. We trained, prepared, expected a war that never came. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had stepped back from the edge. But peace doesn't last. It never does. Because not long after, Yugoslavia fell apart, and what followed was something closer to hell than war. Ethnic violence, massacres, cities burning from the inside out, neighbor turning on neighbor. It was chaos wrapped in hate, and the world stepped in too late to stop it. That's how we ended up in Sarajevo, or what was left of it. A city under siege, surrounded, strangled. For nearly 4 years it had been cut off, bombarded daily by artillery, mortars, and snipers. The buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky, hollowed out, lifeless. Streets once full of life were now open kill zones where stepping into the wrong place at the wrong time meant instant death. Even the air felt different, heavy, burnt, like something sacred had been abandoned there. We were deployed as peacekeepers, but there was no peace to keep, only survival. Every day, hundreds of shells rained down on the city. Water and power would vanish for weeks. The smell, God, the smell, rotting waste, unburied death, and something deeper, something that clung to your lungs and never quite left. But it wasn't the shelling that terrified us the most. It was the snipers. They were everywhere, hidden in broken buildings, behind shattered windows, inside shadows that moved only when they fired. You never saw them, but they saw you, always. And if they saw you, you were already dead. I'll never forget the first time I witnessed it. An old woman, fragile, slow. She stepped into the street, trying to cross with a bag of what little food she had left. Then, a single crack. She dropped, instantly. No warning, no hesitation, just death. Clean, precise, like she had been chosen. That was Sarajevo, a place where life could end between one heartbeat and the next, where unseen eyes watched every movement, where the line between the living and the dead felt too thin, too thin. Some of the locals whispered about it, about how the constant death had awakened something beneath the city, something ancient, something that fed on fear. They spoke of unseen entities, jinn drawn to suffering, lingering in devoured buildings, clinging to places soaked in blood. They said the city wasn't just under siege by men, but by something far older, something invisible, something that watched from the ruins. We laughed it off at first, soldiers tend to, but after a while, after enough days of watching people drop without warning, after enough nights hearing distant shots echo like whispers in the dark, you start to wonder, because sometimes it didn't feel like we were just being hunted by snipers. It felt like something else was guiding the bullets, watching, waiting, choosing. And in April of 1993, we met something that made us question everything.
By April 1993, we had been stationed in Sarajevo long enough to recognize patterns. Where shots usually came from, which buildings were active, which corners of the city felt like death zones. We'd identified multiple sniper positions by then, 4, maybe more. Each had its own rhythm, its own signature. You learn these things quickly when survival depends on reading invisible threats. But then, something changed. One morning, a new shot rang out. Not from any known position, not from any of our mapped buildings. It came from somewhere wrong. We didn't think it was aimed at us at first. The bullet landed too far off, too clumsy. It felt like someone testing a rifle rather than aiming to kill. Almost inexperienced. A new player. That was the first thought. Then the second shot came. Closer. And that's when we realized we were the target. We returned fire immediately, following protocol. Our armored position gave us cover, and we pinpointed the general direction. The building was derelict, half collapsed, swallowed by shadows and dust, a high-rise skeleton overlooking the street. We fired. The building went quiet. Too quiet. No return shot. No movement. We assumed it was over, but the next day, it happened again. Same building, same angle, same inaccurate shooting. It almost felt humiliating, like the shooter didn't understand what he was doing, or worse, like he didn't care if he succeeded or failed. But then, something worse happened. He stopped targeting us and started targeting civilians. That changed everything. We moved fast. A second unit pushed toward the building while we stayed back to cover the street.
Civilians were trapped in the open. Any delay meant death. When our team entered the building, they expected a fight. Instead, they found nothing. No sniper, no weapon, only empty rooms, spent casings scattered across the floor like athar, traces of something that had already left, and a single hole in the wall, perfectly aligned with our position. The shooter knew exactly where to aim, but not how to shoot. That contradiction unsettled everyone, because if he was truly that bad, how had he survived long enough to fire multiple days in a row? And more importantly, where was he now? That night, the command made a decision. We would set a listening post in an adjacent building, a trap, a hidden position. If the sniper returned, we would finally catch him. We called it a counter-ambush, but deep down, it felt like something else, something heavier, something like waiting for a ghost to reveal itself. Before dawn the next day, a small team moved into position. Radio silence, concealed entry, no mistakes. We waited at our checkpoint while they stayed hidden in the ruined structure above the city. Hours passed, nothing. Then, a tapping sound came through. Not speech, not words, just rhythmic interference. But we all understood immediately. Someone else was in the building with them. And then the silence broke. Short, controlled gunfire. Then nothing again. We held our breath. The radio stayed quiet for a long time. Too long. Until finally, a voice came through. Calm. Shaken. Alive. They had engaged a 3-man sniper team. 2 were eliminated. 1 survived. Captured. But what came next was something none of us were prepared for, because when they searched the bodies, they found something that didn't belong there. Something that turned a routine mission into something far more disturbing.
After the firefight in the derelict high-rise, the radio silence didn't feel normal anymore. It felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. Our team upstairs confirmed what we already feared. 2 of the sniper team had been eliminated. Clean shots, efficient. The 3rd man had surrendered, dropping to his knees the moment he realized he was alone. He was taken alive. But what came next changed everything. When they searched the bodies of the dead snipers, they found the usual things first: ammunition, cigarettes, small bits of cash, nothing unusual for a war zone. But then, one of the soldiers found something in a pocket. A passport. Italian. At first, everyone thought it was a mistake, a forgery, a trick, because it didn't fit. This wasn't supposed to be a place for outsiders playing war games. This was a siege zone. Blood, artillery, survival. Not tourists, not visitors. They checked the face. They checked it again. No mistake. The man was Italian. Real identity, real documents. And that's when the entire situation stopped feeling like a normal military engagement. It started feeling wrong. The captured Serb soldier was brought in for questioning. At first, he looked terrified, confused, like he was just a small piece in something far bigger than him. Through a translator, we asked him directly, who were the Italians? His answer didn't make sense at first. He said they weren't mercenaries, they weren't fighters, they were customers. The room went quiet. He explained slowly, carefully, that these men had paid for something. Not weapons, not protection, but permission. Permission to be brought into the war zone. Permission to shoot. Permission to kill. A kind of nightmare tourism. What he called war safaris. At first, nobody believed it.
Even the translator hesitated, repeating the words like they were poison in his mouth. The idea was too absurd, too twisted, like something pulled out of a darker corner of hell where morality had collapsed entirely. But the Serb insisted. He said they were escorted in, positioned, guided, and then allowed to fire from sniper points during certain windows of chaos. It wasn't random. It was arranged, controlled, almost like a game. We were told they had money, a lot of it, enough to move through the right channels, enough to turn a war zone into something consumable, a market of death. And suddenly, the strange behavior of the sniper team made a horrifying kind of sense. The poor accuracy, the hesitation, the unnatural timing of shots. It wasn't incompetence. It was experience without discipline. They weren't soldiers. They were participants. When we reported it to command, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Because if it was true, then this wasn't just war. It was something far more corrupt, something that turned human suffering into entertainment. But command refused to act on speculation alone. A passport wasn't enough. A prisoner's statement wasn't enough. Even bodies weren't enough, because proving something like this meant opening doors that no government wanted opened. So the conclusion was simple. Officially, nothing confirmed. Unofficially, the 2 dead men stayed dead, and the captured soldier was processed like any other prisoner. The Italians were never identified further. No investigation expanded. No scandal broke. But for us on the ground, nothing felt the same again. Because now there was a question none of us could answer. If they were really tourists, how many others had already been here? And how many shots we had heard in the city were never meant for war at all?
After that incident, Sarajevo never felt like just a battlefield again. It felt like something else entirely. Something watched. Not in the way soldiers watch each other through scopes, but in a deeper, more disturbing sense, like the city itself had become an audience, and we were all unknowingly performing inside it. The official reports stayed cold and distant. Paperwork, codes, ambiguous language, the kind of writing that avoids naming what it cannot control. But among soldiers, words spread differently, quietly, carefully. Stories of weekend snipers, strange activity spikes, shots that didn't match known positions, and civilians who claimed they could sense patterns, more movement, more death, always around certain times of the week. Friday, Saturday, then silence again. It didn't take long for the theory to form in hushed conversations. Visitors, people flying in, disappearing into the chaos for a short window, then leaving again before anyone could track them. Not soldiers, not locals, something else. We never had proof beyond what we already saw, but proof wasn't really needed anymore. Because once you've seen a man with an Italian passport in a sniper's pocket, once you've heard a prisoner describe war like a paid experience, your understanding of reality starts to fracture. The city itself began to feel different after that, not physically, but emotionally, as if the suffering had accumulated so much that it changed the atmosphere. Buildings looked the same, but felt aware. Streets felt like corridors being observed. Even silence felt intentional. And then there were the moments that couldn't be explained at all. The sniper shots that came without echo.
The civilians who collapsed in places no known shooter could reach. The sudden pauses in shelling that felt too perfect, too structured. It stopped feeling like random violence. It started feeling orchestrated, not by one side, but by something that existed above both sides, something that turned the city into a stage of human collapse. Some soldiers joked nervously about it, calling it coincidence, chaos, fog of war. But no one laughed for long, because deep down, everyone could feel it, that uncomfortable truth sitting beneath everything. We weren't alone in that city, not just in the physical sense, but in the sense that something else was observing the pattern of suffering itself. Maybe it was people, maybe it was corruption, maybe it was something older than either. The locals had their own explanations. They spoke of jinn lingering in ruined buildings, feeding on fear, growing stronger where death repeats itself. They said when a place becomes soaked in too much violence, it stops belonging only to men. It becomes shared between the living and something else. I don't know what I believe anymore. What I do know is this: Sarajevo never felt random. Not the shots, not the timing, not the way fear moved through it like a current. Everything felt watched, measured. And when I think back to that high-rise, to that captured sniper team, to the Italian passport that shouldn't have existed, I can't help but wonder, were we really fighting a war? Or were we just inside something far more disturbing? Something that studies what humans become when they are left alone long enough in darkness. Because in that city, the darkness didn't just surround us, it paid attention.
And with that, we bring tonight's terrifying story to an end. But remember, as the night grows darker, the secrets only grow deeper. Follow or subscribe now, if you have the courage.